That wallpaper, a garish explosion of rose and emerald, had always grated on me. Its discordance with the heavy mahogany furniture bequeathed by Mark's grandmother, furniture I'd strained to help him move, years etched in sweat and aching muscles, felt like a personal affront. Now I'm packing a poultry bag amidst its clashing patterns, a life distilled to a handful of garments, my cherished, time-worn Tennyson, and the shaving kit, a 10th anniversary memento from Margaret. The irony stings. The only possessions that truly matter are anchors to a life now adrift. Mark hadn't uttered the explicit words of dismissal, yet his silence resonated louder than any shouting match. It resided in the grim set of his jaw, the averted glances, the curt replies that had become his new vernacular. Last night, his suggestion, cloaked in casual concern, that a smaller dwelling might be more fitting for me. Fitting. As if I were an overgrown philodendron needing repotting. Snapping the suitcase shut, I placed it by the door. A pathetic island of my existence, marooned in a room that never felt like home. A wave of grief overwhelmed me, sharp and unexpected. This wasn't about the house itself, but the accumulative farewells, the subtle dilutions of connection, Margaret's passing, the gaping chasm her absence carved. Mark had stood beside me at the funeral, rigid and unyielding. No hand offered, no comforting embrace. Just a sterile, "She's in a better place, Dad," empty platitudes in the face of a heart-wrenching void. I had craved his support, needed him desperately, and he'd been a stranger. Crossing to the dresser, I picked up a faded photograph. Margaret radiating youth and spirit, her eyes brimming with playful light. Beside her, a gangly, grinning Mark, all awkward angles, and myself, leaner then, with a thick head of hair, practically bursting with paternal pride. We were a family, a vibrant, tangible unit. Now I'm merely an encumbrance, an aging presence cluttering the spare room, a financial burden. The unspoken mandate hangs heavy in the air: depart, vanish, let me proceed with life's business. Little does he realize the consulting contract I secured 6 months ago. He sees only the retired accountant, subsisting on a modest pension. He remains oblivious to the $85,000 a month quietly accruing in a hidden account. It would be so easy to expose him, to witness the shock morphing into disbelief, to savor the satisfaction of revealing my secret. But to what end? Would it alter anything fundamental? Would he suddenly perceive me as a person, not a problem to be solved? No. It would merely introduce another layer of complication, fuel further resentment. Sadness is a constant shadow these days, a dull ache beneath my breastbone. Yet, something else is now astir, a flicker of defiance, a nascent anticipation. For the first time in ages, a glimmer of possibility. Replacing the photograph on the dresser, the smiling faces now seemed to taunt me, relics of an irretrievable past. But I refused to succumb to consuming regret, to allow bitterness to fester within. Gathering the suitcase, I walked out of the room. Mark occupied the kitchen, engrossed in his phone. He acknowledged my entry with a glance, a fleeting expression of relief in his eyes. "Leaving already, Dad?" he inquired, his tone carefully measured. "Yes," Marks now replied, striving for composure. "I am why—" He offered no assistance with my bag, no parting embrace, no farewell sentiment, nothing, merely a clipped nod. Stepping through the front door, I was greeted by the crisp, sunlit air, a welcome contrast to the stale, floral ambience of the spare room. I flagged down a taxi. As it pulled away from the curb, I glanced back at the house. Mark stood framed in the doorway, watching my departure, his expression impenetrable. I faced forward. The city unfolded before me, vast and uncharted, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt unfettered. The taxi smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and pine air freshener, a familiar cocktail that triggered a cascade of memories. Funny, the things that stick with you, the olfactory snapshots of a life lived. As the city lights blurred past the window, I couldn't help but replay the reel of my own years, a film strip of quiet desperation and unspoken bargains. I remembered the late nights at Penhaligon and Stern, the fluorescent hum a constant companion. The junior accountants, fresh out of university, would head home to their takeaways and box sets, while I stayed, hunched over ledgers, the numbers swimming before my tired eyes. Margaret would have left a shepherd's pie warming in the oven, a silent testament to her understanding. Not once did she complain about the hours, the missed school plays, the half-hearted anniversary dinners. She just knew. Those were the years of scrimping, of turning off lights in empty rooms, of clipping coupons from the local paper. We weren't poor, not exactly, but there was always a tightness in my chest, a low-level anxiety about making ends meet. The firm never really appreciated my efforts. I was reliable, yes, but not flashy. Not the type to schmooze with clients over expensive lunches. I was a worker, a cog in the machine, content to keep things running smoothly. And for what? So Mark could have the best education, the latest gadgets, the opportunities I never had. I recall the day he got accepted to that fancy private school. The fees were exorbitant, a gut punch to our already stretched budget. But Margaret's eyes shone with pride, and I couldn't deny him. I took on extra shifts, swallowed my pride, and asked Mr. Stern for a small raise. He coughed, looked away, and said the firm was tightening its belt. So I tightened mine further, skipped a new suit, patched up my old shoes, and pretended not to notice the holes in my favorite armchair. There was a time, long before Margaret, before Mark, before the endless spreadsheets, when I harbored ambitions of my own. I wanted to write, to fill notebooks with stories and poems. I even submitted a few pieces to literary magazines, only to receive polite rejection slips. The dream faded, replaced by the more pressing realities of rent and groceries. It wasn't a conscious decision, more a slow erosion like a river wearing down a stone. Margaret never knew about the writing, or much else about those early dreams. I kept them locked away, afraid to expose my vulnerabilities. We built our life on practicalities, on shared responsibilities and quiet affections. There wasn't much room for grand gestures or emotional displays. I loved her deeply and truly, but I showed it in small ways, by making her tea in the morning, by holding her hand during Sunday walks, by always ensuring the car was safe for her to drive. Now, as the taxi pulled up to the Grand Majestic Hotel, a monument to extravagance I could suddenly afford, the weight of those years settled upon me. All the compromises, all the sacrifices, all the unspoken longings. And for what? To be dismissed as an inconvenience, a relic from a bygone era. The doorman, resplendent in his uniform, smiled and opened the door. "Welcome to the Grand Majestic, sir." I stepped out of the taxi, took a deep breath of the cool night air, and walked into a life I never imagined. The digital missive pinged into existence at precisely 8:17 a.m. Already up, I was submerged in the cavernous armchair, a tepid brew warming my hands more than my insides. Sleep had been a battlefield. The unyielding opulence of the hotel bed, the alien silence that had replaced the city's usual din, had been my enemies. The subject line was stark: consulting opportunity. My heart, that faithful but time-worn pump, stuttered a surprising beat. The CV submission had been almost rote, a gesture more reflex than expectation. A click. The sender was a Mr. Alistair Finch, senior partner at a firm shrouded in obscurity, a firm specializing in legacy systems integration. My decades spent wrestling with archaic mainframes, a skill set bordering on the arcane, it seemed, was unbelievably in vogue. My online profile had caught their eye, my background deemed profoundly impressive, and they were extending a 6-month consultancy with the possibility of renewal pending performance. The specifics swam before me. My vision, never keen to begin with, battled the screen's harsh glow. But a figure, bolded and underscored, anchored my attention. $85,000 per month. $85,000 per month. I scanned it again, slowly, meticulously, as though interpreting cuneiform tablets, genuine. The sum felt almost preposterous, a cruel joke considering my history of meticulous budgeting and agonizing over supermarket savings. All those late nights at the terminal, wrestling obstinate code while Mark was at football practice, or later, lost in the haze of university parties, all those unseen sacrifices casually dismissed, and now, this windfall. A brittle chuckle scraped its way out, a sound that seemed to mock the quietude of the room. Finch's message requested a phone call at my earliest convenience. He projected an aura of urgency. I could almost taste the desperation for someone capable of breathing life into those vintage machines. I shut the laptop, a surge of giddiness hitting me. I needed time to absorb this. More tea was essential. I shuffled to the small kitchenette, the plush carpet deadening my footsteps. I prepared the tea with careful deliberation, the familiar actions pulling me back to earth. As the vaporous tendrils rose, I thought of Mark. Mark, whose gaze held thinly veiled impatience when I fumbled with the new television's controls. Mark, whose suggestion of a retirement community with organized activities wasn't unkind, but carried that familiar sting of condescension. Marquoise, who clearly believed my time had passed, my utility spent. The tea possessed a bitter, acrid tang. I settled back into the armchair, the laptop resting on my lap. I composed a reply to Mr. Finch, accepting the offer, contingent on a review of the complete contract. Professional, succinct, aloof. The kind of message I'd crafted countless times during my career. Then, the laptop closed once more. An odd impulse seized me, a sudden, exhilarating wave of rebellion. I wouldn't breathe a word to Mark. Not yet. I wanted to observe, to witness, to see if his assessment of me would shift, if his behavior would alter, if the mere whisper of this newfound prosperity would reshape our dynamic. Petty, perhaps, immature, but after years of silent acquiescence, of suppressing my own desires and needs, the lure was irresistible. Let him continue to see me as the fading relic, the financial albatross. Let him cling to the belief of my reliance on his benevolence. Let his true nature reveal itself. I finished my tea, the unpleasant taste clinging to my palate. A meeting required scheduling, a contract demanded scrutiny, and a life yearned for reassembling. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I detected a spark of anticipation. The first prickle of unease came subtly, an exhalation thick with forbearance, as Mark skirted the precarious tower of garden glossies dominating the coffee table. Their decluttering had been deferred, relegated to the murky depths of my to-do list by protesting joints and the siren song of the sun-drenched patio. "Really, Arthur," he sighed, the words laced with just a touch of steel, though seemingly gentle. "This place is starting to resemble a storage facility." I offered a murmured apology, a familiar constricting sensation already taking hold in my chest. It wasn't about the periodicals, not really. It was the space I inhabited, the oxygen I consumed, the very inconvenience of my prolonged existence. The consulting income, a closely guarded secret, offered solace against the constant sting of his disapproval. Nearly 100 grand annually, and I found myself still contrite over a few misplaced magazines. The next jab arrived cloaked in solicitude. Mark sat opposite me at supper, meticulously arranging his chicken breast. Fastidiousness had always characterized his eating habits. "You know, Dad," he began, maintaining an even vocal plane, "have you given any thought to right-sizing?" My fork paused mid-flight. "Right-sizing? Yeah. This house, it's quite a lot for one person, and the upkeep must be a grind." A vague gesture encompassed the dining room, the antique sideboard, the Persian rug, the faintest whiff of lavender wafting in from outside, appurtenances he once seemed to admire, now apparently emblems of my encumbering presence. "I manage," I replied, my tone a tad sharper than intended. "But do you truly?" He leaned forward, those familiar blue eyes earnest. "Think about it. A smaller footprint, fewer responsibilities, more time to unwind and indulge." The unspoken echo hung in the air, and less of a drain on my resources. I offered no argument, finishing my meal in silence, the poultry rendered utterly tasteless. My taciturn nature had long served as my sanctuary, yet, lately, it felt more like confinement. Each unvoiced sentiment, every quashed protest, eroded something vital within. The most glaring clue materialized a few days later. I wrestled with replacing a spent bulb in the hallway fixture, my equilibrium compromised, the ladder feeling distinctly wobbly beneath me. "Mark, could you lend a hand?" I called out, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. He materialized in the doorway, phone fused to his ear. He lowered it an inch, a fleeting expression of impatience flitting across his features. "Can it hold, Dad? I'm on a call." "It's just a light bulb," I retorted, frustration bubbling up. "I can't quite reach." Another sigh, that weary exhalation that had become the soundtrack to my autumn years, a subtle eye roll, so swift it might have been imagined, but it wasn't. I registered it. It cleaved through decades of fatherly devotion, the self-denial, the quiet pride I'd always felt in his achievements. He pulled the device from his ear. "Fine, fine, but make it snappy." With practiced economy, he replaced the bulb in mere moments, his movements efficient, bordering on brusque. He avoided eye contact. "Thanks," I mumbled, retreating. He was already returning to his conversation, muttering something about wasted minutes. As I watched him vanish down the corridor, a chilling certainty took root. The hints were no longer subtle. They were a prelude, a carefully constructed charade to soothe his conscience before the inevitable ejection order arrived. Close to 100 grand annually, and I was still reduced to angling for slivers of consideration within my own walls. That night I remained sleepless, the moonlight painting shimmering patterns across the bedroom floor. The consulting agreement was a bulwark, a weapon, a clandestine arsenal of independence, but it couldn't repair a fractured heart. It couldn't undo years of gradual belittlement. It couldn't secure a love I'd apparently never genuinely possessed. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I surrendered to the sheer immensity of my solitude. It was a crushing weight, but I knew, with newfound resolve, that I wouldn't be bearing that load here for much longer. Mark cleared his throat, a sound that always preceded pronouncements of discomfort. He'd asked me to sit down with him in the living room, a room I'd always felt slightly out of place in, the minimalist decor, the expensive art. It all screamed Mark, not us. "Dad," he began, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, "we need to talk about the living arrangements." I already knew where this was going. The subtle jabs, the loaded questions about my health, the not-so-subtle hints about downsizing. It had all been building to this moment, a crescendo of thinly veiled impatience. "Okay, Mark," I replied, keeping my voice even. Inside, my stomach was churning, a familiar ache I'd learned to live with since Martha passed. He avoided my gaze, focusing instead on some invisible speck on the expensive Persian rug. "Look, Dad, I love having you here, I really do. But things have become difficult." Difficult for whom, I wondered, but kept the thought to myself. "Space is becoming an issue," he continued. "The kids are getting older, they need more room, and frankly—" He finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine with a practiced blend of concern and firmness. "It's becoming a lot for Sarah to manage. You know, with the house and the kids and everything, and me." I finished silently. I was the everything that was too much. He rushed on, seemingly eager to get it all out. "And honestly, Dad, I'm not sure you're really contributing as much as you used to. With your, well, you know." He trailed off, letting the unspoken, my age, my perceived uselessness, hang in the air between us, my hands clenched in my lap. Contributing. Had he forgotten the years I'd helped with the mortgage, the endless hours I'd spent fixing things around the house, the countless times I'd driven the kids to school and soccer practice when he and Sarah were too busy climbing the corporate ladder? It seemed he had— "I understand," I said quietly, though understanding felt a million miles away. The truth was, I didn't understand. I didn't understand how a son could so easily dismiss a father, how blood could become so diluted by ambition and self-interest. Mark seemed relieved by my lack of resistance. "So," he said, his voice lightening, "we were thinking that maybe it's time you started looking for a place of your own. There are some lovely retirement communities not too far from here. We could even help you find one." The offer of help felt like an insult, a patronizing gesture meant to ease his conscience. He wanted me gone, and he wanted to feel good about it. I looked around the living room, at the carefully curated collection of expensive objects, at the family photos strategically placed on the mantelpiece. I saw myself reflected in the polished surfaces, a ghost in a home that was no longer mine. "Okay, Mark," I repeated, my voice still calm, still betraying none of the turmoil raging inside. "I'll start looking." He stood up, clapping me on the shoulder. a gesture that felt hollow and insincere. "Great, Dad. That's great. I knew you'd understand." He turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the silence and the slow creeping realization that I was being evicted from my own life. I sat there for a long time, the weight of his words settling on me like a shroud. The anger would come later, I knew, but for now there was only a dull ache of disappointment and a profound sense of loneliness. My son, not knowing about my raise, had kicked me out, but instead of arguing, I walked away with quiet dignity. "All right, son," I said, the words feeling like pebbles in my mouth. "I'll pack my things." Mark visibly relaxed, the tension draining from his shoulders like water from a punctured bag. He mumbled something about being busy and disappeared back into his office, leaving me alone with the echoes of his request, no, his demand. The spare bedroom, my room, felt smaller than usual, the walls closing in. I pulled my suitcase from the top of the closet, the musty scent of disuse clinging to it. It was the same suitcase I'd taken on our honeymoon, the same one I'd used for countless business trips, each journey a sacrifice of time and presence. Methodically, I began to fold my clothes. My worn sweaters, my comfortable trousers, each garment holding a memory. The blue sweater Mary knitted for my 60th birthday. The tweed jacket I wore to Mark's graduation. Tangible pieces of a life that was now being dismantled, boxed and shipped out. I paused, holding a photograph I found tucked in the pocket of my good coat. Mary and me, young, full of hope, standing in front of this very house. We looked so different then, so full of naive optimism. We'd imagined a future filled with family dinners, grandchildren running through the yard, a haven of love and laughter. The laughter had faded some time ago. Closing the suitcase, I walked through the house one last time. The living room, where Mark had learned to walk, clinging to the edge of the coffee table. The dining room, where we'd celebrated countless holidays, the table laden with food and surrounded by family. The kitchen, where Mary had spent hours cooking, her hands moving with practiced grace, each room a repository of memories, now tainted by the sting of rejection. I touched the smooth surface of the piano, remembering the countless hours I'd spent playing for Mary, her voice soft and melodic as she sang along. I hadn't touched it since she passed. The music had died with her. In the hallway, I stopped at the framed family portrait. Mark, Sarah, and their 2 children smiling brightly, a picture of suburban perfection. I was there too, standing slightly behind, a quiet, almost invisible presence, an accurate reflection of my current status. When Mark finally emerged from his office, briefcase in hand, he seemed surprised to see me standing by the door, suitcase at my feet. "Leaving already, Dad?" That was quick. "Yes, well," I said, forcing a smile. "No point in dragging things out." He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. "Look, Dad, I know this isn't ideal, but—" "Don't worry about it, Mark," I interrupted, my voice surprisingly steady. "I understand." I didn't, not really, but I wasn't about to beg for understanding or compassion. My pride, battered but not broken, wouldn't allow it. He offered a perfunctory hug, patting me awkwardly on the back. "Keep in touch, okay?" "Of course, son." As I walked out the door, I glanced back at the house, a wave of sadness washing over me. It wasn't just the house I was leaving, but a part of myself, a lifetime of memories, sacrifices, and unspoken love. I hailed a taxi, giving the driver the address of the small apartment I'd quietly secured a few weeks ago, a contingency plan born from a growing sense of unease. As we pulled away from the curb, I saw Mark standing in the doorway watching me go. He looked small, diminished somehow, standing there alone. I didn't wave. The taxi sped away, carrying me towards an uncertain future, a future I would now face alone. But as the city lights blurred past the window, I felt a strange sense of liberation. The weight of expectation, of obligation, had lifted. For the first time in a long time, I was free to be myself, to live my life on my own terms. And Mark, my son, had no idea that his obsolescent father had a monthly income rivaling his own. He would never know that I was leaving not out of necessity, but by choice. I had the means to stay, to fight, to make his life difficult. But what would be the point? He'd already made his choice. Let him live with it. The lock clicked open with a disproportionate clamor, announcing my intrusion into this desolate space. Number 14, third floor. The building reeked faintly of boiled greens and bygone hopes. Inside, the air hung stagnant, a testament to abandonment, while harsh rays knifed through smeared glass, spotlighting dancing dust. Smaller than recalled from the viewing, emptier still. With a groan, I lugged the first box in, 40 years compressed into cardboard. The sheer ludicrousness of it washed over me, a tidal wave of incredulous grief. I landed heavily on the box's edge, the cardboard protesting beneath my weight. This was it, then, a fresh start, unsolicited, unwanted, yet undeniably here. To unpack felt like etching a tombstone. Each item placed, a cracked teacup, a sepia-toned memory, a forgotten book of verse, a tiny monument to a life dissolved. Familiarity felt alien here, each object exiled in this impersonal box. The floral armchair, formerly a bastion of comfort, now clashed jarringly against the peeling walls. After wrestling with archaic fixtures, I coaxed a tepid trickle from the showerhead's mouth, barely enough to dampen my hair, yet enough to wash away grime and layers of sorrow. Wrapped in a frayed towel, I confronted my reflection. An aging stranger, face mapped with anxieties, stared back from the fractured glass. A gnawing hunger reminded me of a missed meal. Spotting a local deli in an actual phone book, I decided to venture out. This neighborhood offered a sharp contrast to Mark's manicured prison. Life spilled onto the sidewalks, children's shrieks chasing a rolling sphere, elderly women exchanging stories on brownstone steps, the air saturated with unfamiliar spices. I moved slowly, cautiously, a stranger in a strange land. Faces, unknown and unknowing, blurred past. In some, a rough-hewn kindness flickered, a simple acknowledgement of shared space. One woman, her face a tapestry of wrinkles, offered a genuine smile, a warmth that eclipsed the anemic sun. The deli buzzed with lively chatter. I ordered pastrami on rye, hold the mustard, claiming a cramped table by the window. From that, observing the bustling street, I felt oddly removed, an audience member watching a play in which I held no role. Back in the flat, the silence pressed in, a tangible weight. Reading proved futile. The words swam and blurred. Television offered only meaningless flickering shapes. Loneliness, an unwelcome but familiar spectre, settled in. I thought of Mark, his clipped, impatient pronouncements, his dismissal of my opinions as senile ramblings. The sacrifices I had made, the overtime logged, the dreams shelved, all for him for his advancement. And now I was an inconvenient encumbrance, discarded without thought. But beneath that, a burgeoning spark, not mere resentment, something stronger, bordering on freedom. Untethered, free from expectations, free from judgment, free to chart my own course. The $85,000, a secret reserve, a bulwark against the fears of advanced age. He didn't suspect, none of them did. I silenced the blaring television, the sudden hush amplifying the city's hum. I moved to the window, gazing at the galaxy of lights, a constellation of lives, each a complex and messy universe unto itself. Not the life I had envisioned, granted, but irrevocably mine. And perhaps, just perhaps, a genuine beginning. The community center was a kaleidoscope of sounds and smells. Children shrieked with laughter in the gymnasium, the aroma of lukewarm coffee hung thick in the air, and a woman with a voice that could shatter glass called out bingo numbers. I'd come seeking something. Connection, perhaps, distraction, anything to fill the echoing emptiness of my new apartment. Esmeralda, Esme, she insisted, Rodriguez, sat behind a table laden with pamphlets. Her smile was instant and genuine, crinkling the corners of her eyes. "Welcome. What can I help you with today?" I shuffled forward, feeling the familiar weight of my age. "Just looking," I mumbled, reaching for a brochure about gardening workshops. "Looking is good," she said, her voice warm like sunshine on a cool day. "But if you're looking for something specific, don't be shy. We have everything from Tai Chi to tech classes for seniors. and the lunch program is excellent. Chef Maria makes a mean paella. I chuckled softly. Tai Chi, eh? Might need that to keep up with the youngsters. Esme laughed, a rich, throaty sound. Never too late to learn something new, Arthur. I'm Esme, by the way. She offered her hand, and I took it, her grip surprisingly strong. Arthur Penhaligon. Well, Arthur Penhaligon, welcome to the fold. You new to the neighborhood? I hesitated. Relatively, just moved into the building on Elm Street. Ah, Elm Street. We have a few regulars from there. You'll meet them. Come by for lunch tomorrow. It's on me. The genuine kindness caught me off guard. Mark hadn't offered me lunch in years, not even a simple sandwich. I felt a strange prickling behind my eyes. That's very kind of you, Esme. Nonsense. Community is what we're all about. Now, tell me, what are you really interested in? Her directness disarmed me. I spent the next hour talking to Esme about my past. Carefully edited, of course. No mention of the 85,000 dues or Mark or the disagreement. I spoke of my late wife, Margaret, of the small garden we used to keep, and of my love for classical music. Leaving the community centre, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Perhaps this new beginning wouldn't be so bleak after all. My building on Elm Street was a study in faded brick and weary windows. It wasn't much, but it was mine. As I unlocked the door to my apartment, I heard a voice. Hey there, you new? A woman with bright red hair and a mischievous grin stood in the hallway. She held a cat carrier in one hand. I'm Dolores, and this is Mr. Snuggles. Mr. Snuggles, a fluffy Persian, peered out of the carrier with disdain. Arthur, I replied. Arthur Penhaligon. Welcome to the Elm Street Arms, Arthur. Don't mind the peeling paint. The rent's cheap, and the neighbors are interesting. Interesting how? I asked, a smile playing on my lips. Oh, you'll see. We have a retired opera singer, a taxidermist, and a conspiracy theorist who believes the pigeons are government spies. I laughed. Sounds lively. It is. We have potlucks every month. You'll have to come. I'd like that. Dolores winked. Good. See you around, Arthur. Don't let the bedbugs bite. Later that week, I went to the local grocery store. I misjudged the weight of the bags, and by the time I reached the sidewalk, my arms were aching. A young man with kind eyes and a baseball cap saw my struggle. Need a hand, sir? He asked, his voice polite and sincere. That would be very welcome, I admitted, my breath coming in short gasps. He effortlessly hoisted 2 of the bags. Where are you headed? Elm Street Arms. I know it. I live just around the corner. Consider me your personal grocery Sherpa. We walked in comfortable silence, the only sound the rustling of the plastic bags. At the entrance to my building, I offered him $1 for his trouble. He waved his hand dismissively. Nah, don't worry about it. Just doing my part. Have a good one, sir. As I watched him walk away, I felt a warmth spread through me. Simple kindness, freely given. It was a stark contrast to the cold practicality of Mark's world, a world where everything had a price, and sentiment was a weakness. Here, in this forgotten corner of the city, I was finding something unexpected, a sense of belonging, perhaps, or maybe just a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there are still good people willing to lend a hand. Dolores's ever-present coffee fumes still permeated the hallway when my phone vibrated. Mark. I checked the display. A sigh, unbidden, slipped past my lips. Dealing with Mark was the last thing I wanted. Delaying the inevitable, however, felt pointless. Hello, Mark, I said, aiming for a neutral cadence. Dad. Settling in, all right. His voice, a practiced blend of solicitude and brisk practicality, reminded me of a physician dispensing a routine prognosis. I could picture him perfectly, perched on the edge of his pricey leather chair, his attention already drifting to the next item on his agenda. I'm fine, Mark. The apartment is serviceable. I deliberately kept my answer ambiguous, let him conjure images of the worst. Serviceable, everything functioning, utilities, plumbing. The questions came rapid-fire, as if he were running down a mental list. He probably envisioned a squalid little place, a reflection on his own prosperity, a burden he was begrudgingly shouldering. Say everything works, I specified, choosing my words with care. It's compact but manageable. A pause. I knew what was coming, the true purpose of the call, veiled beneath the pretense of familial concern. "So, Dad," he began, his tone shifting, almost nonchalant. "Financially speaking, are you finding the pension sufficient?" A low chuckle rumbled in my chest. The irony was rich. "I'm getting by, Mark. I'm quite the resourceful chap, you know." "Right, resourceful," he echoed, the word tinged with skepticism. But are you certain you don't require aid? I mean, we did discuss a budget, yet unforeseen expenses always arise, don't they?" "Indeed, they do," I conceded, envisioning my monthly deposit landing in my account, a sum that dwarfed his past bonuses. "Yes, but I'm taking care of them." Taking care of them how precisely? Impatience was beginning to seep into his tone. The careful charade was cracking. He craved specifics. He needed to quantify just how precarious my existence was, just how reliant I was on his beneficence. "I've always been astute with money, Mark. Ever since you were small, remember?" I gently tossed the bait, a mischievous spark in my eyes. He ignored the barb. "You haven't taken out any loans, have you?" Loans? The audacity! I nearly choked back laughter. "Mark, really?" "I'm not losing my marbles." I grasped the concept of accruing interest. "It's just, with inflation and all," his voice trailed off, grasping for a credible justification for his prying. "I simply want to ensure you're not suffering in silence." "I rest assured, Mark," I stated, my voice firm. "I am far from suffering. I am adapting." I lingered on the word, letting it resonate. "And frankly, I'm rather enjoying the peace and quiet." That seemed to prick him. "Well, should you need anything at all, don't hesitate to call. Anything within reason, of course," he added hurriedly, as though recalling some predetermined monetary threshold. "Naturally," I answered, suppressing another surge of amusement. "I appreciate that, Mark. Right then. Glad to hear you're getting by. I've got a conference call starting shortly. Speak soon." The connection severed. I stared at the device, a strange confluence of resentment and amusement swirling within me. He was clueless, utterly oblivious. He perceived only what he chose to perceive, an aging, dependent parent, a mere inconvenience in his finely tuned existence. Let him maintain that delusion. Let him cling to that belief. It was far more entertaining that way. I set down the phone and ambled to the window. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the foliage of the elms across the street, painting long shadows on the pavement. I watched a young couple pushing a buggy, their faces radiant with joy. A twinge of something akin to regret, yet also something else, something approaching liberation, echoed within me. I wasn't suffering, I was adapting. And for the first time in a while, I felt like I was in command. The burden of anticipations, the tacit judgments, the unspoken disappointments, it had all vanished. I was unencumbered, free to be Arthur Penhaligon, not merely Mark's progenitor. The realization enveloped me like a comfortable quilt, dispelling the lingering coolness of Mark's call. I grinned. Esme had mentioned a pottery workshop at the community center. Perhaps I'd enroll. I'd always wanted to try my hand at molding clay. Mark's birthday. Another year notched on the sundial of his life, each one widening the gulf between us. The embossed card mocked me from the kitchen counter, a slick island in my sea of organized simplicity. Should I even RSVP? The prospect of strained pleasantries and observing Mark's meticulously constructed facade of joy evoked a profound fatigue. Yet, paternal ties, however frayed by years of simmering resentment and his ultimate, sharp rejection, still held me. I decided to attend. The gathering unfolded exactly as predicted, a congress of Mark's polished peers, each radiating an aura of achievement that felt both foreign and vaguely oppressive. Thin laughter and the delicate chime of crystalware filled the air. Mark held court at the epicenter, beaming, his arm possessively around Sarah, their expressions calibrated for the audience. I spotted Esme by the laden buffet. She appeared vibrant in a simple summer dress, her raven hair a glossy cascade. Immersed in animated conversation, her genuine laughter sliced through the curated atmosphere. I gravitated towards her, seeking warmth. "Arthur, "I'm so pleased you could make it," she greeted, pulling me into a welcoming embrace. "Rara, how are you settling in?" "It's progressing," I hedged, skillfully avoiding mention of my dwindling finances. "Quieter, certainly." Esme squeezed my forearm. "You deserve tranquility, Arthur. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her gaze held an unexpected depth, as if she could perceive the quiet resilience I'd long concealed. Mark eventually materialized, his smile strained. "Dad," he said, his tone devoid of true feeling. "Glad you could come." "Happy birthday, Mark," I responded, presenting him with a carefully selected gift, a vintage fountain pen, an item I knew appealed to his refined tastes. He accepted it with a cursory nod. "Thanks. Look, I need to circulate. Enjoy the festivities." He vanished into the throng. I watched him disappear, a familiar pang in my chest, so consumed by his ambition, so intent on upholding his carefully sculpted image, he remained oblivious to the solitude lurking behind my eyes. "Don't let him dishearten you, Arthur," Esme murmured. "He's just Mark." I lingered another hour, observing Mark from afar. He appeared content amidst his coterie of friends and associates, but a certain emptiness flickered in his gaze. He was chasing a phantom, striving for a prize that perpetually eluded him. As departure neared, I sought Mark out one last time. He stood apart near the patio, gazing at the immaculate lawn. "Mark," I ventured quietly. He turned, a fleeting flash of annoyance crossing his features. "Dad, I'm rather occupied." "Just wanted to say goodbye," I stated. "And to let you know I'm thriving. Truly thriving, actually." He arched an eyebrow, suspicion coloring his expression. "What's that supposed to signify?" I smiled. A genuine smile this time, unfelt for a long time. "It signifies I'm provided for. Mark, more than adequately. You no longer need concern yourself." I offered no further explanation. None was needed. The look on his face, the nascent understanding that he might have underestimated me, proved sufficient reward. I turned and departed, leaving him there, silent. As I drove away from the celebration, a sense of liberation washed over me. I had voiced my truth, and I had finally severed ties. The past lay behind me. The future, in all its uncertainty, was mine to shape. I was no longer defined by my relationship with Mark, by his expectations or his rejections. I was emancipated. The twilight sky blazed with fiery hues as I journeyed back to my apartment. The modest dwelling, once a symbol of my reduced circumstances, now felt like a haven. Solitary, yes, but also at peace. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I was authentically, unreservedly myself.